What if sheep and goats aren't actually that different? This is another perspective on a familiar Bible story. Today we're talking about the parable of the sheep and the goats. You can find it in Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46. Before we even get into the text, you need to know that Jesus would often get into fights with a group called the Pharisees and another group called the Sadducees. As the Sadducees and the Pharisees were using religion in different ways to oppress the most vulnerable people in that day. And Jesus doesn't like this. And so he tells this parable about goats and sheep and says that he will separate the goats from the sheep. And a lot of the times people look at this parable and they're like, yep, at the end of the time, Jesus is going to separate the sinners from the redeemed people. And some people are going to hell, those are the goats, and some people are going to heaven, those are the sheep. In 1998, the band Cake released an awesome song called Sheep Go to Heaven, Goats Go to Hell. It's a real bop, you gotta listen to it. Back to the story, the temptation is to read this text and to think, oh, the goats are the bad ones, so that must be the Sadducees and the Pharisees. But this type of thinking is actually the problem. We start splitting people up into groups, saying you're the good ones, you're the bad ones. That's exactly what Jesus is trying to address. Did you know that goats and sheep are actually very similar on a biological level? Sheep and goats are roughly the same size. They both have 4 stomachs for digesting food. They both come from the bovidae family. They have the same number of chromosomes, and male sheep and male goats both grow horns. The major difference, though, between sheep and goats is that sheep have much bigger hearts. In Matthew 25, after talking about the sheep and the goats, Jesus goes on to offer those famous words that when I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. And you know the next line. That's when the people say, but Lord, when did we see you thirsty or in need like this? And Jesus says, truly, I tell you, whenever you did it to one of the least of these, you did this to me. In other words, it's about the way that you treat other people. That's what Jesus says right after talking about separating the goats from the sheep. It's about the size of your heart. Okay, I'll confess, I'm not positive that Jesus had a firm grasp on animal biology or that anyone in those days knew that a sheep's heart was larger than a goat's heart. But I do know that Jesus calls us to have big hearts, to care for those in need, to care for the most vulnerable, and to make that our priority. When you look at the life of Jesus, that was his priority, and he calls us to follow him.